There's no golden rule that says you have to barbell back squat with a straight bar on your back.
With a wider stance squat, when you are trying to recruit that posterior chain more, you really have to have a good rooted position with your foot.
If you're doing a regular squat, your lower leg, which is the lever being operated by your quadricep, only tilts from the neutral vertical position by about 30 degrees.
When I met my first coach, it was like, we just, every day we train, we squat.
My main beef and contention with the box squat is that you're not relying on your nervous system to dictate to you where to stop.
If you just sit back, on a squat, you are going to be winding up using more muscle than if you just reach your knees forward and like, oh, my knee hurts there.
Well, you see the 520 for 24 and people are like, well, that's not as deep as, say, Tom Platz did his. Well, are you measuring how far his shins go forward or how deep his actual hips are? Because if you look at it that way, it's pretty damn close.
Well, you mentioned like fundamental movements, and then we think about like a squat. Like obviously a squat is a very fundamental movement. I mean, people have been doing it for as long as people have been around for, right? But it gets to be interesting when we put a barbell on our back. And it gets to be interesting when we start to have weight that could represent, equaling our own body weight, or sometimes doubling our own body weight, or in some cases tripling or quadrupling our own body weight, depending on how strong an individual is. And something I observed in coaching a lot of people around the country, I saw a lot of dysfunction happening in the upper body, which shocked me. I just never even really thought about it, because as a power lifter, you get in these kind of like rigid positions, and I only need to squat down so low. I don't have to squat down as low as the demands that you had as an Olympic lifter. So it's like, okay, I don't really care. My shoulders are stuck. Not a big deal. I'll just put my arms out wide and I'll have my stance out wide and I'll just do this motion, And I used to think like, hey, if I, do this and stay in these positions, like I should be able to be relatively healthy, and unwinding some of this, like how hard could it be, when I get done with my powerlifting career? But now I'm starting to see, and now I'm starting to kind of find out, and it is taking a lot to kind of unwrap this, tight ball that I kind of created to do my sport the right way. But my question is like, how fundamental are some of these movements? Like these movements that we do in the gym, I think we just think they're just these movements, but they're movements that we made up. And like a squat in and of itself is just an interesting movement with the weight on your back and the way that our arms are. And now we have the luxury of having really great barbells where you could put your hands in different positions. We don't have to worry about trying to, overarch or underarch, or like there's a lot to think about when you do a squat. So I guess my main question is like, what are some of the movements that you view as being fundamental? And then from that point, how do you assess and like loading those?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the big thing to understand is, why do we call the squat a fundamental human movement? And it's because neurologically, when our bodies are developing, when we're very young, it's a movement that allows us to then explore the rest of the world. You crawl, you stand, you're squatting to get to that stand. If you watch a little baby, they're squatting down to pick things up, and then you start walking and running. So the squat is a fundamental, neurologically developmental movement that allows us to explore the world. Now, the squat then, as we are aging, as we're adults, usually is something that's kept within our movement repertoire. If you go to a lot of different places around the world, people just squat down as they're preparing food. If they're, waiting at the bus stop. My co-author for both my books, Kevin Santana, his parents are from Laos. And he would tell me often that his mom would be sitting in a deep squat just preparing dinner. Yet how many people in America could sit down in a deep squat for more than a minute without feeling just their body just completely on fire? So that's where the movement comes first. And the big thing I always tell people, the squat is a movement ever before it's an exercise for that reason. Now, when it comes to the exercise, it is then how are we applying load to the movement pattern? And where the implement or load is being placed will change how that movement looks slightly. Now, again, you mentioned that there's many different bars that we have. There's no golden rule that says you have to barbell back squat with a straight bar on your back. That's what the sport of powerlifting has gone to.
Thank you very much. I like that.
But the squat can be a loaded goblet. It can be a zercher. There's so many different ways in which you're squatting. Again, as an exercise, it just means we're loading the movement pattern. And then based on where the load is, the movement will take on slightly different changes in order to stay balanced. So for one example, I always tell people, if you want to know whether or not you're performing the squat correctly for your body and your current level of mobility, so not like, oh, you need to get more mobility work before you do this. If you have a bar on your back or your chest or over your head, view from the side and watch where the bar's tracking. If your body is doing it correctly, the bar will track over the middle of your foot and your body weight will spread across your entire foot, the tripod foot, not all your weight in your heel, obviously not your toes with your heels popping up, but you're balanced. So for example, a low bar back squat's going to have the bar sitting across your middle of your shoulder blade. A high bar back squat's up higher on your traps. Now, because of that change where the bar's sitting a little bit lower on your shoulder blades, in order to stay balanced, that chest is going to have to tip forward. You're going to have to incline your trunk just a little bit more. And in doing so, the hips are going to go back. The knees are going to be pulled back a little bit more. It's not going to be as upright as a high bar back squat. Same loaded movement, slightly different change in how that posture is. It'll be even more pronounced if we compare the low bar back squat to the front squat. Now, all that does is shift where torque is being placed. The quads are still working hard. The glutes are still working hard. Your core stability is still very, very much in tune, but it changes torque because with a front squat, in order to stay balanced again, keep the bar over the middle of the foot when viewed from the side, the knees are going to have to shift forward a little bit more. The hips are going to come forward. The chest is going to be more upright. Now, power lifters obviously chose the squat, the back squat, as the mode of competition. A weightlifter, because they're only working on the snatch and clean in competition, often choose squat.
Weightlifters, by the way, only asked to do 2 exercises, where power lifters are asked to do 3. So we know power lifters are superior.
But a power lifter, right, only has to, or will compete in the back squat, whereas a weightlifter, they'll use either the front squat and or combination of front squats and high bar back squats usually, because it will more so mimic the demands of their competition lifts. But again, overhead squats as well, that'll change your what that looks like as well. So going back to it, it doesn't matter for just general fitness. If your goal is to load a squat, it can be any type of squat. There is no golden rule that says you have to barbell back squat. But going back to what you were talking about, how you were really, really stiff with the barbell back squat. And then since you're done competing, it's taken a while to sort of undo that to make you more functional, we'll say, right? In part, the stiffness that you did create, though, for powerlifting probably helped you excel in that sport to a greater degree. And I'll give you an example of why that's so important. I know you've had Dr. Stuart McGill on the show before. Stu would always say, you're never going to see a 1,000-pound squatter touch their toes. Why? The physical adaptation needed in order to hoist a ton of weight on their body requires a ton of stiffness. In the same sense, you're not going to see someone who's great at yoga put 1,000 pounds on their back. The adaptation needed to become extremely mobile and flexible has decreased their ability to maintain a lot of load on their body. Now, when we're talking sports specificity, if you're trying to be the best in the world at powerlifting, you're probably going to see adaptations more so to developing that stiffness. Now, does that mean that I don't need sometimes powerlifters to bring their hands in a little bit more? Right? Because if you're super wide, sometimes that can limit how well you're locking in the barbell because you're unable to get those lats engaged as well. I made a recent post with Shane Hunt, who's under Instagram, Hunt Powerlifting.
Oh, yeah.
We talked about, that's another one to follow. Yeah. And Shane was talking about, we were collaborating on how the upper body is so important to lock that in when you're squatting. A lot of people, they don't know, what do I do with my elbows? And elbow pain is a huge issue, especially with my powerlifters who squat low bar. And they don't even realize, well, it's because of the way in which you are holding your body, holding the bar. Ideally, we want to see most people have that elbow in line with the back of their torso. Some people have to have that elbow jutted out like a chicken wing. And some people have to go super wide with their hands because they physically can't get that barbell close to their body. Now, there's a few tricks that you can do in the short term without any mobility changes that can allow you sometimes to bring your arms in a little bit closer. You can take sort of that talon grip where you just are sort of over the top. Joe Sullivan is a good power lifter who shows that right now a lot. And some people will go thumb on top rather than getting their hand under. JP Price, I know you guys know him well. JP would always tell me that was one of the things that helped him take a little bit more of a narrow grip, was to take his thumb out from under the bar. But again, small changes. Are we addressing the overall big issue, which a lot of times stiff lats, stiff pecs, they're not going to allow that hand to come in close. And for some people, bringing those arms in just a little bit closer can allow you to create a little bit more dorsal stiffness because you can lock the lats down a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying that every powerlifter has their hand have their hands in real close to their shoulders, but it's about finding sort of what's optimal for you. Because the closer you can bring your hands in from a very wide grip, and you can just try this on your own, have your hands out wide, try to lock your lat down, bring your hands a little bit closer, and you can just feel that lat kicks on a lot more. That lat is an extremely powerful stabilizer for your entire torso when used appropriately. And then you breathe and you brace, you can create much more intra-abdominal cavity pressure. Like Dr. Stuart McGill always says, the more stabilization you can create in your core, the more power and force you can unleash in your legs. So it can really help out with that as well. So that's a long-winded answer, hopefully, to your question.
Another thing that we were mentioning is your squat form. One of the things that I found really interesting when I was looking at your content a lot years ago, because I was paying attention to like your mechanics on things. First off, mechanically, you were a very efficient lifter in terms of the way your lifts looked. Like everything was, you didn't look like you made certain lifts struggle more than others. But your squat form was different than other people's. Number one, your hands were like here. I don't know if we could even find
really
it.
Close. Yeah,
your hands were super close, and when you squatted, it's like your feet were straight forward, and you loaded into the knees as you were going down. And I was like,
dude, that's the cue I used.
Yeah, like the cue you used was loading into your knees.
Yep.
So I was so shocked.
Was that more of a knee wrap thing, or was that you just always did that?
That was more of a knee wrap thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really? So nowadays, though, when you look at you squatting, it looks more like a powerlifter squat. And you mentioned that's because of the muscle you gained.
Yep.
Do you think that people could, if they do find that they can't squat that wide, should they focus on trying to really strengthen their adductors over time or something?
Hey, that's up to them, man. Because, well, strengthening your adductors, absolutely, right? Yeah. I was still doing adductor work at the time, like, because I knew they were a weak muscle group. I just couldn't. I didn't have the room to gain size. I couldn't gain any muscle. I had big quads and I had an overdeveloped lower back. And so I had to figure out how to use those for literally all three lifts, right? Because I couldn't afford to add the muscle that would actually make me stronger. Yeah. And pound for pound, I was a hell of a lot more successful doing that than I am now. But when I was able to add that size to my hamstrings, my glutes, my adductors even, you can support that weight in different ways, right? You can distribute the weight that you're lifting over more muscle groups because you have those muscle groups now. And it's exactly the same with the back thing, right? So I was working with Susie Gary to set up my squat form originally, and she's a great IPF lifter. And she's
the one that calls all the attempts for people and stuff too,
yes,
right? Yeah, she's got it all like precise and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
So she was like, look, the big guys are going to tell you want to support the weight with your upper back. And that's because they have all this upper back. Like they have that muscle. We're little people. We can't do that. You got to get your chest under there as much as you can. And to do that, I had to push my elbows, try and get my chest as big as I could. So that's why I ended up in that position. So yeah, it wasn't necessarily optimal, but it was competitive, if that makes sense.
What's with the barefoot stuff? You're training barefoot a lot, it looks like.
Part of it is because I grew two shoe sizes and didn't want to buy all new shoes.
He's got shoes with
being
holes
honest,
in them.
Yeah. The other thing is that, so I have flat feet. And again, for a long time, especially with that narrow feet forward squat stance, you can get away with that because you're not going to have a whole lot of inward motion. There's nowhere for the knees to go. With a wider stance squat, when you are trying to recruit that posterior chain more, you really have to have a good rooted position with your foot, right? And so for me, being barefoot forces me to focus on that more than if I'm wearing shoes. I can be more mindful of how the floor feels under my feet and how my weight is distributed over the foot.
What's your cue for your feet? Because that's actually a pretty big deal. So how do you cue into root your foot?
That's a good question. I don't have a mental cue. When I was first starting, Taylor had me go through some drills with my toes, with my foot pressure. And so I'm a big kinesthetic guy. So I try to, when I figure out, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel, I just go off in a corner and I close my eyes and I just kind of visualize that feeling, right? I'm not thinking about any words. This is a tip Mike Teixeira gave me. Don't try and verbalize, because if you try and verbalize, you're going to have so many things running around your head, you can't focus on lift. If you think about, okay, this is the feeling of that lift, it's a lot easier to implement.
It was kind of fun coming up with verbal cues to like accommodate for that, you know. It was almost like there was very little time to understand a whole lot of thoughts, so it had to be a very direct and simple cue. Like I remember one time I was trying to get him to activate his feet, and I said calves, and I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that." And he was like, "No, say that." That clicked. So it doesn't matter if I say like, "Go shit your pants." If that gets him to put his feet into the ground, that's what I'm going to say.
Right.
So do that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to be said for that mind-muscle connection. I remember when we started working on bench, one of the first things he told me, he come over and just pokes my tricep. He's like, supposed to be using that, buddy, not the other muscles.
Right.
And that was really helpful. I don't think Chris would mind if we told. So Chris Bridgeford, he just did a meet, did really well, hybrid showdown. He was having some problems figuring out his squat form after knee surgery, after hurting his quad and everything. And so one of the things Taylor was doing with him was like poking at his hamstrings, glutes, be like, look, use these. You don't have to be all quad.
Sit back a little bit more.
Yeah. Or down a little bit more. But yeah, so I think those types of things are very, very helpful. And a lot of people are just reading all this stuff in the reading all this information on the internet. And they're like, these cues don't make sense to me. It's like, not every cue
for someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
We got a Power Project family. We talk about eating meat all the time on this podcast. Pause. But sometimes you might want to eat some different meat. Pause. You might want to eat duck, chicken, Japanese A5 Wagyu. You might want to change things up. That's why we've partnered with Good Life Proteins, which also has certified Piedmontese beef on their website. Now, all you have to do is head to goodlifeproteins.com and you can select Build a Box with all of the proteins that you want. Then you'll select Subscribe and Save to save money on all of your meat. Pause. Enter code POWERPROJECT to save an extra 5% on any subscription you select. So if you want to get your beef every 2 weeks, you'll be able to save 25% on all of your meat. Again, that's goodlifeproteins.com. Links are in the description along with the podcast show notes.
So there wasn't like a squat everyday thing.
Mm-hmm.
No one had a squat everyday program until someone started selling it. But like when I went to my first coach, when I met my first coach, it was like, we just, every day we train, we squat. Like, you want to be good at these things, how you get strong. So we squat every time. And it started off kind of easy where it was like, we would start off like, we train. I'd meet him once a day. We'd train. We'd start, snatch, clean, and jerk, do those work, and then squat. And then with me, he just kind of went down this road because like I had the time and he had been retired. So he was living in Montana and it was just me. I just drive out there, an hour both ways, uphill in blizzards, right? And I would hit, let's do a single. I'd work up to a single. And then the next day he'd be like, let's do 2 sessions. So I'd squat, at the end of that and then the end of the second session. And then eventually just kind of built and built and built. And we had always seen like sample programs from Bulgaria. And like, you'd see like a week of training in a magazine. And it's like, snatch, clean and jerk, squat in the morning and then snatch, clean and jerk, squat in the evening. And so that was just like, you just squat every day. Like, it wasn't even a thought, like, can you squat every day? Like, is someone going to give me permission to do this? You just start doing it. But he went nuts and I did too. Like, we would squat first, then snatch, clean, jerk, squat again. So we started doing 4 squats a day. And then there'd be days where like, hey, in between the snatch and clean jerk, let's squat also. So it'd be like 6 squats in a day. And these workouts were like 6 reps. It'd be like you'd snatch to maximum and then you'd put 175 on the bar. You'd do that, then 200, then 205. And that was it. And we just do that. So it's like every hour there was some giant squat happening.
Didn't you squat as many as like 16 times in one day?
No. Like I think probably 10 was the most, 8 to 10.
Okay.
That's insane. Did your body get used to it? Were you really sore all the time or?
Yeah, like you just kind of feel like shit in general.
Like you have a cold permanently.
Yeah. Everything was stiff. I mean, it's not anything beautiful to watch me run now, but it's like my knees wouldn't bend when I ran. I didn't actually run. The first time Joe saw me run, you can tell the story.
I was going to decide when I said I had a good running story because Mark's been running a lot. The first time I saw him run, we were first dating. And I think we were in the city.
It was almost over with before it started.
No, I was like, we have to catch that bus. And I ran across the street and then I turned around and I saw Max and it was so awkward. I felt bad. Like I felt a little like sink in my stomach. Like, oh my God, I made this man run. It was incredibly awkward. Yeah.
Yeah. Weightlifters, like when you train like that, your body just starts to adapt to doing that thing, right? And that thing isn't necessarily like, you're not like necessarily progressively developing tons of strength. You're like just surviving. Oh shit. Like today is the day you got to like, you're going to put this weight on your back and bend your knees. So like, the adaptations you make are like, make your hips tighter and knees
turn
tighter.
Everything into cement.
Yeah. And it's just like, there you go. You're surviving. Right. And so it was just like, I probably ran like my hips went in circles. My feet and knees didn't move much. kind of like wobbling down the street. Yeah.
It's kind of hard when you can only put one foot in front of the other, but not the other side, right? From doing the cleans, right?
Yeah.
Oh, the split jerk.
Yeah, split jerk. Yeah.
There's a Bulgarian coach I heard you talking about once. I don't know how to say his name. Started with an A.
Abajev.
And you were mentioning how he would want his athletes just to sit and rest all day long post-training, like almost in a comatose state, right?
Well, his whole system was like, you do, like, it was, you know, if you look at like the principles of training, right? The two most important principles are specificity and overload, right? You have to do the things you want to be good at in the sport. And then you have to make, you know, training progressively harder to actually make adaptations that are, you know, directed at what you want. And his whole thing was like, what can we delete from the program? And so it was like everything extraneous to just maximum intensity snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat should not be done. So his whole thing, his ideal circumstance was that you wake up, you eat, you do 30 minutes of squatting, which is, you know, you might work up to maximum. Then you lay in a chair with your eyes closed, not asleep, but just like get your heart rate as low as possible and just rest for 15 minutes. Wake up from that, get up from that, and do snatch to maximum. The same thing. So your whole day, in his ideal world, your whole day would just be like mostly like almost comatose and maximum intensity, right? Yeah. You
were trying to live that lifestyle.
It's not conducive to earning an income or, you know, like supporting yourself or having feelings.
You did work your way to, I mean, attempting a 700-pound squat, and then you eventually hit a 700-pound squat. When you were training as an Olympic lifter, what was like your body weight? I know as a power lifter, you did a 705 squat at like 220, I believe. But what was like your training weight normally, and you know, what kind of weights were you able to hit in training?
As a weightlifter, so as you can imagine, right? You're all thinking, listening to this now, like, what's wrong with that training method? That's great, you got strong, but it worked for my legs and knees and hips and back. Never had problems. Never had a soft tissue injury in any of that doing maximum squatting. I got hurt later when I switched to like more powerlifting style training, but in weightlifting, the weakness was my shoulders. So I would snatch and clean and jerk, and you train that heavy and that often, and you can't develop like good skill and technique because it's like every lift is a matter of like do or die. Like you have to either make this lift or you're gonna, you know, it's like that's all that matters. So you don't have a time to like hone your skill and perfect the technique. And so my shoulders got destroyed. I had 2 shoulder surgeries later on because the bar would just be in the wrong spot, and I would fight it. We did 0 general training. Like when I tell people the program, it was for 6 or 7 years, it was 3 or 4 exercises. Squat, front squat, snatch, clean and jerk, power snatch, power clean and jerk. 0 curls, bench. I know you can't tell, but I didn't do a lot of like anything else, right? No upper body strength stuff at all.
Yeah.
Cause you know, Coach Goff was like, well, why would we need that? That's not the sport, you know? And so that was just like a huge mistake because it just killed me. I just destroyed my shoulders because, you know, I was tenacious and I wasn't going to give up. But like, you know, when you're missing lifts, you know, all day, I missed the first time I clean and jerked 160. I missed it like 20 times. And I just kept cleaning and kept trying.
Within the same session.
Yeah. The same day, probably multiple settings. Probably took a nap.
So for you, your legs were probably strong enough. Your lower body could execute most of the movement, but your upper body wasn't really on board with it.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. It's like my legs and back were strong, and I was mentally tough enough to like keep doing it. It was probably the worst scenario because like the weak link was my shoulders, and just got hammered and destroyed. I was when I you know. To get back to your question, but like when I was still training hard, like at some point my shoulders hurt so bad I would eat ibuprofen, and I would take like 500 pills in a month, and my stomach was just awful, and like But
what milligrams are these tablets?
Whatever, 200 each.
Jesus.
Yeah. Well, you buy them at Costco, right?
Yeah.
The Bulgarian pack. It was like a 2 month supply. Specifically for weightlifting. I had a picture of a Bulgarian weightlifter on there.
But like, that's me.
Yeah. My best numbers were a 140 snatch and a 170 clean and jerk. And I weighed like like a heavy 85. So I was about like probably 88 kilos, 90 kilos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not great. Nothing special. Not terrible, but like just kind of middle of the road. I got way stronger and I started to learn how to lift later before I got hurt. But
did you guys meet at a competition?
We met at the gym, and
I did see you at a competition before, though.
Yeah,
but we didn't meet there. I just remember, like, who is this like Superman-looking guy who's really strong?
I paid her to say that.
How long ago was that?
Clark Kent.
Was that 2009?
We met in 2009, so I think I saw you at a Fit Barbell meet in 2008. Yeah, but we met out at Cal Strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
those old videos. Your commentary is my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. There it is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no. This is what made me famous. You know, when Misha Kokliev came here, or you were there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I went up to introduce myself. And to me, it was one of those cool moments where he's like, oh, I know who you are. The 270 squat to 0 to 60. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Pretty wild.
Yeah. But this was my normal warm up. So the guy on the left was like, you should do a video. And I was like, okay, why? And he's like, just do what you normally do, but let's just do it all at once. Like every single day I would do the same thing. 1 red, 2 reds, 3 reds, 4 reds, and then, miss something.
With just whatever amount of break in between to load the plates probably, right?
Yeah. That one was hard.
We were just doing some sissy squats in the gym with the slant board. And obviously it's a sissy squat, so didn't feel any spinal load, felt great contraction and great feeling in the quads. Can you explain why that sissy squat, I'm only using 150 pounds or whatever, why it's more beneficial for direct quad hypertrophy than doing something like a squat or a leg press or even a hack squat?
Yeah, absolutely. So the basic physics principle is that a pendulum, which is hanging vertically, is parallel to resistance, gravity, right? So it's neutral. It's a zero lever. If you take that pendulum and you swing it up so that it's horizontal, it's a maximum lever. 100% of the available resistance will be loading onto that muscle. If it's somewhere between vertical and horizontal, it will load the muscle with a percentage between 0 and 100%. To make things simple, I just say a 45-degree lever is a 50% active lever. Okay, so if you're doing a regular squat, your lower leg, which is the lever being operated by your quadricep, only tilts from the neutral vertical position by about 30 degrees, which means you're only getting about 30% of the available resistance, which is your body weight plus the weight on your back. Okay, if you're doing a sissy squat and you allow that lower leg to get horizontal, now you're using a 100% lever. So to put some numbers to it, I usually say if you're a 200-pound guy, got 200 pounds on your back, 400 divided by 2 legs, and you can do the math of the magnifier of the length of your lower leg and all that, you're getting about 950 pounds of load per quadricep. But if you do a sissy squat, you weigh 200 pounds, no additional weight. You'll load each of your quadriceps with 1,200 pounds of resistance. That is more stimulation for growth, period. Doesn't matter that you're not using as much weight on your back. What matters is what the quadricep is experiencing. So when we're doing the cable squat, that cable is perpendicular to your lower leg, and you're getting 100% of the weight you're using, and you're loading more quadriceps with less weight and nothing on your spine. So if your objective is to load the muscle, and it should be, right? If your objective is not lifting the most amount of weight you can lift, but instead getting the most amount of growth, you should be using the mechanics that makes you magnify the resistance more, not minimize it more.
I think this sounds incredible for people that are just starting out, or for older folks that want to load the muscles, rather than just, go in there and just learn how to squat just for the sake of squatting and squatting more weight. The argument on the other side would be, and I'd like to kind of get your point of view on this, a squat can, people have built a great body off of squatting, and a lot of other exercises, and maybe a lot of other things too. So it's hard to identify what exactly is causing what, right? But some people would say, hey, squat, bench, deadlift, bent over row, military press, those are kind of the fundamental exercises that everyone's done for a long time, and they can help build some mass. What are your thoughts on that? And like, you're saying 30, it's only working 30% of the quad muscle.
No, I didn't say that. 30% of the weight you're using is loading the quad muscle.
what percentage of the quad muscle is getting utilized in a regular squat, or does that depend on
the whole muscle? It's all or nothing. When a muscle contracts, it contracts all or nothing. Now, but you are hitting on something different here, and that is when you're activating the hip extensors at the same time as you are in a squat, you're deactivating the hip flexors, part of which is the quadricep,
right,
which is the rectus femoris. So now you have a neurological conflict in addition to the mechanical conflict. So you're not getting optimum quadricep stimulation with a barbell squat. You're just not.
And then what are your thoughts on like a squat, just kind of building overall body strength?
Let's just say that you are going to do a body weight squat. Great. Okay. Because the cost is low. There's nothing on your spine. Okay. You're working your cardiovascular system. You're working your glutes. You're working your quads. You're working your balance. You're working your athleticism. All good stuff. Once you start to increase the weight, once you start to go 200, 300, 400 pounds on your spine, the cost goes up. Then you have to start saying, am I getting a commensurate benefit to the quadricep? And the answer is no. You're getting a diminishing percentage of benefit to the quadricep as you're getting an increased cost.
What if you're not necessarily concerned about the quad and you're just like trying just to get big? Like you don't care that it works your back and your traps and your butt, and you're actually excited that it does all those different things because you're trying to get kind of bang for your buck, so to speak.
Well, again, you are getting quadricep and glute and erector spinae and athleticism and all that. That's true. If you want to do only one exercise, the squat is fine. But if you want maximum quad development and maximum glute development and maximum erector spinae development, you would do better by doing 3 different exercises, and you'd get more mass, more size, more growth.
So this is the thing. This is where I find it funny when I look at the YouTube comments, especially after the last episode we did, and we've had other guests on and we've talked about this stuff. People think people want to be on either one side or the other. I like to marry things, right? So I bought your book and I've been using a lot of the movements from the book, but I've still been squatting. I've still been doing a lot of like deep knee flexion squats, etc., while still adding in a lot of this work because I know that if you're someone who likes to squat and progress that, and like if you're a powerlifter, that's your sport. But let's say you're an athlete that likes squatting, okay, you can squat, but then you can also add in sissy squats, etc., and all these other movements. And I do understand that the squat is somewhat of a taxing movement, so you need to be careful with how much you load it so it doesn't take too much away from other movements that you do. But there should be no reason, depending on the intention of the lifter. If the intention of the lifter is like, I just want to maximally load my quads and nothing else, I don't care what movements I do, sissy squat. Right? But if an athlete wants to progress other movements, get for the squat, get all these other muscles working while also using movements that will massively activate the quads, there should be no reason why we can't just add all these into a decent program.
I don't disagree.
Exactly.
No, I mean, look, if you're trying, and this is common, right? You get a guy who says, I want to be big, but I also enjoy the process of squatting. I enjoy the camaraderie. I enjoy, the feeling of the weight on my back. Great. I'm not saying that you're going to distract from the gains you got from the sissy squat because you added squats. No, that's not going to happen. It's just more of. If you're just comparing the two, one versus the other, you're going to get more quad with the sissy squat, period. Yeah. But if you're not talking about just quad development and you don't mind doing more work and you enjoy doing more work, you can absolutely marry them.
The coaching and cueing that is given to participants in research studies is horrible.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because of that, there's very little we can actually derive from a lot of the kinesiology studies. It sucks to say. It's not like, okay, just disregard everything, but we have to take every study, especially human subject studies, where they take them in and do like strength training. We have to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, still look at it, but we can't just take it at face value. Because if you have someone squat, they're not sitting into their hips, they're not sitting back, guess what? They're going to have to reach excessive depths to have any semblance of glute and hamstring activation. So my answer to that would be like, hey, if you're going to squat with lousy squat form, yeah, you're going to have to go deep to get your posterior chain to fire up. But with a proper 90-degree squat, you sit back into the hips, you know how to load it. Then in what I've seen, 90 degrees is where it maximally happens, which again, some of the research studies show that. Surprised, to be honest, when the research study says that like 90 degrees was best. I'm like, man, they must have actually had some trainers in there giving them proper cueing. That's amazing. So
that's a big point right there, because when you see a lot of people squat, like a lot of people are like, oh, my knees hurt when they squat, and then you watch them squat. A lot of people, most people that squat don't know how to hip hinge. They don't know how to sit back into their hips. And like once you sit back here, my glutes are firing already.
Yeah,
right.
Or someone's shoulder elbow hurts when they bench press.
Right.
And it's like maybe they're, maybe for a long time they haven't learned how to use proper form and technique. I'm a huge fan of a box squat, and I've been utilizing box squats for many, many years. Are you a fan of the box squat? And if you are, like in what fashion? Like, would you have someone maybe do more touch and go? Because I see you doing a lot of like isometric holds and stuff. So maybe you wouldn't necessarily be a fan of a box squat because maybe it's relaxing the athlete too much. But I've always liked it because it gives me a target. It gives me a spot to stop at every single time, so I know exactly where I'm going. I can dictate the weight by changing the height. I can go in accordance to how my body feels for the day. So if I don't want to give up any position in my lower back or don't want to have to shift forward or anything like that, I can raise the height of the box. If I feel like, handling a little bit more weight, I can raise it up. What are some of your thoughts on a box squat?
Yeah, no, I think the box squat definitely has a lot of merit. Before I even answer that, the box squat, if we look at the trends in powerlifting, like box squat has become very popular. Pin press, board press, floor press, spotto press, rack pulls. Like, how are all these like partials becoming so popular? In my opinion, it's because powerlifters have had to learn to adapt over time to stay healthy so they could actually compete in their sport. Because, training full range, I think there were a lot of injuries from that. And I think whether a lot of powerlifters want to realize it or not or admit it, I think a lot of these, like the box squat, has become popular because of necessity. It's been to avoid injury. So I do think it's superior to an ass to grass squat. And you mentioned this a little bit. My main beef and contention with the box squat is that you're not relying on your nervous system to dictate to you where to stop. You're not saying, okay, I'm going to go down to where I find that maximal tension 90. Oh, there it is. It's like, no, you haven't. And it's not arbitrary, but it's semi-arbitrary, because unless you find a 90 or a box squat that is made specifically, customized for your body, that it happens to be your exact 90-degree squat, then it's probably going to be a little above or a little below 90. So it's giving you that stopping signal before your nervous system tells you what optimal range of motion is. So, but besides that, I do think a box squat definitely has merit, and I like it. And I think it's superior to going deep, at least on a consistent basis. What's
the cue for the squat that you might recommend to somebody who's listening to this now that maybe hasn't seen a lot of your work? Like, what's the feel? What's the correct kind of terminology so they know that they're getting to the right spot, I guess, the right depth? Like, what should line up, or what should it look like?
Yeah, I think if I just had to narrow it down to a few cues, first off, keep your feet perfectly straight and very activated. So don't just let them like pancake in the floor, pass a foot, activate the foot.
Why so much emphasis on the foot being straight, in your opinion?
Yeah, it just goes back to that joint centration topic we talked about earlier. It's like, hey, if we looked at someone jump, we're not going to have the feet rotate out, right? Because that would be a mismatch of force vectors. You have force, basically distributing it outwards. We're trying to produce force straight down. The best way to do that is have everything vertically stacked, not rotated out. Okay. So, and when we do that, we're going to feel like the force is going straight through rather than around or to the sides, where we have that unequal weight distribution. So we could get more into that in a second, but I think the straight foot position, make sure their hips, knees, and ankles stay in line. Like I said, sit back a little bit to their hips without actually folding over. Okay. And then stay as tight as possible from head to toe, and find your first natural stopping point. And that's it.
Great. And so to just kind of ruffle things up a little bit here on the show today, I decided to invite Mike Israetel onto the show to discuss this a little further, because he's on the opposite spectrum of you. But I think we're all professionals here. We're all adults, so there's no reason to fight. But I think we can maybe just have our audience learn a lot more through you guys being on some opposite ends. So here is Mike Israetel popping on in.
Hey,
buddy!
Listen,
Jesus,
wow,
why?
Jesus,
What'd you get a pump before you came on here?
What the hell?
I know that the onus could be on myself and my extreme musculature, but Mark, I think we have to take some time to look at your mustache and examine, I was going to say something highly politically incorrect, referencing children, etc. Who let you out of the house like that, and have the police been informed?
This is pretty much Nsima's idea. He said it looked great. Nsima's my aesthetics coach.
I stay really close to Gen Z, so I know what's going on.
Nsima, you are yourself very aesthetic, but you're really, I think, playing a sick joke on your friend.
I know. I think he's trying to like bring me down more so he looks. You know what I mean?
No.
Anyway, great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm sure you've seen some of Joel's stuff, and I think it would be great to get in some conversation because you're promoting full range of motion. And Joel has a different perspective. Yeah, team full range of motion, and he's on a different team. So let's open up some discussion on that.
Sure. Joel, pleasure.
Yeah, nice. Can you guys still see me? It broke up there for a second. You guys.
We got you now.
Got you. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, nice to meet you too, man.
Yeah. So listen, these guys just called me randomly, or texted me rather, and they're like, "Hey, this guy's on our show, and you're full of hate and rage. So come on here and be mean." And I was like, "Oh, I can't do that." But perhaps in the spirit of intellectual inquiry, if I may ask you a few questions about your training methods, that I've seen. A lot of what I've seen is on Instagram is perhaps lacking context. Would that be okay?
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Super. All right. So just actually maybe 4 total questions.
Yeah.
So there's a few of the claims made in your videos. The very last actual post is where most of these come from on your Instagram. So one of the little captions or little pop-ups, I don't know how to do those on my own Insta. I'm not that TikTok savvy. But it says that 90-degree stopping process of various kinds at 90 degrees is better for the joints. And I'd be very curious to see how you have arrived at that position.
Okay. Yeah. Before I answer that, I just want to say I actually have great respect for everything you do, because I've seen a lot of people post like, "Hey, Mike, like jump in." And you're always very, very civil the way you handle yourself, very similar to Ben Patrick. So I really appreciate that, because there's a lot of professionals in the field, and we can disagree and all that stuff, but there are some people who just go off bashing the daylights out of people, calling people out, and you don't do that. So great respect and admiration.
Thank you so much
for what you do. So even though we may have different views, I love what you do, man. So so one of the things there, so first off with the captions, like you have 2 seconds to catch people's attention. So yes, some of that is like, hey, I can't give a ton of context because it's Instagram, right? Okay. So it doesn't give me a chance to fully explain everything. I have to put up kind of like the quick thing that's going to get people's attention. And it's not that I don't believe it. I do. But like you said, I think there's some context behind that. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are more in the bodybuilding side of things a little bit. Would you, to an extent?
So my own personal pursuit in training is bodybuilding. It would be comical if I did anything else looking like this. But actually, I'm a tennis player. I'm like, oh, okay. But I also compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I do that regularly. I used to be a wrestler, and I powerlifted highly unsuccessfully for a long time. I've also coached a bunch of actual real athletes, like volleyball players and basketball players and strength and conditioning. So I have some background, but yeah, mostly I just do highly unathletic jiu-jitsu and bodybuilding, which is entirely unathletic.
Yeah, nice. Very cool. So one of the things is like for that post, that was with he's a quarterback, Taylor Heineke. So I was using him specifically because he's had shoulder issues mainly from when he fell on it. He separated his shoulder. And so this is just an example. He could not do any type of chest pressing unless it was, and I mean, this is literally directly from his mouth when we'd be working out. Like he'd be saying like, man, if I go even like this much past 90, it hurts. Like it hurts bad. If I stay right there in that range, it feels totally fine. Now that's an extreme example because he had a separated shoulder and some very high impact and trauma in there. But I have noticed this trend in other individuals, people who've come in with shoulder issues, or maybe even people that were, apparently healthy. But I've seen where oftentimes that full range of motion becomes a problem. And over time, the position that doesn't require any, adjustments, or the position that doesn't cause any inflammatory response is that 90-degree position. And again, I would argue it's because that's where we have maximal motor unit recruitment, maximal cross bridging. So our ability to absorb force and keep tension off the joints is going to be best. So that's kind of my rationale for that.
I gotcha. And so a lot of physical therapists, and this is kind of a position stand in most of the associations now, is they say, like, probably the first thing you want to do after injury initial recovery occurs is try to expand the range of motion to as much of normal physiological range. And also sort of an offshoot of that in the study of mobility and sport performance, a lot of those experts tend to think that mobility, which is flexibility plus strength, like your ability to exert strength through the fullest range of motion possible, is kind of the cornerstone of athletic development. So do you see yourself deviating from that sort of mainstream position for the reasons you've kind of experienced in your clinical practice? Or do you think maybe that has some merit, or there's maybe some middle ground there? What do you think about that?
I think there's definitely some middle ground there because, for example, I can just give you almost verbatim what I did with, I'll go back to Taylor because this is the post that we're talking about. He separated his shoulder. This is in the game playoffs against Tampa Bay last year. He fell on it, diving into the end zone. So he came back 9 days later, and, range of motion was definitely a thing that, like, hey, we had to get that back. It's not like, let's keep the joint immobile and create as much tension as possible. It's like, no. Like, let's get what I would consider full range of motion. One of the exercises that I had him do was a dumbbell pullover, right? Laying on his back on a bench and doing a pullover. And I believe the natural or optimal range of motion for that is actually a pretty large range of motion where he's going all the way back, stretching that. And we gradually open that up. Same thing with overhead movements, taking them all the way. Because at first, he came in, it's like, oh man, that hurts. Gradually, really worked on keeping the shoulders back a little farther, started opening up. So it's not that I'm opposed to range of motion. I think, like you said, there's a lot of common middle ground there. I think there are certain positions, especially when we start loading it, where I would say that going too far beyond 90 is not as optimal. But, there are probably scenarios where people go past that and they would be just fine. So it's not necessarily that I'm against range of motion. I think it comes down to the position. But generally, 90 degrees, I would argue, is kind of where that optimal range of motion is under loaded conditions or high load, high impact scenarios.
And that's kind of based on your clinical experience, I guess. The actual
definitely clinical experience. And then just, like we said, we went back and forth on some of the science because there's flip sides to every side of the science. As you know, you have whether it's, the ketone diet, the paleo diet, whether anything we talk about in the sports industry, there's always two sides of it. One side says this, the other side says this. So I think you can look at the research, and there's probably research supporting both sides, what you're saying and maybe what I'm saying. But I think what helped me kind of apply what I have seen and believe in it more is just what I've seen experientially at that point and anecdotally just from working with athletes.
Mm-hmm. And then when folks come to your account and they're trying to look for tips, do you think it's good for them to think of it in the context of, like, okay, if I'm injured or I have a history of these sorts of problems, maybe I should limit my range of motion? Or do you think everyone, for the most part, as a default, should stick to kind of the 90-degree thing and not really go any lower than that?
On something like on a bench press, I think they do need to be careful. On other exercises, even, if they want to do like certain shoulder mobility exercises that are unloaded, those, I think that's a little bit more of a gray zone. I think there will be a lot of drills in there that probably would be helpful for folks, especially after an injury, just help to kind of like even neuromuscularly, like just get rid of some of those inhibition signals so they can start opening up their movement. But under the loaded conditions, that's where I'm talking a bit more specifically about, especially something like the bench press, which for a lot of folks just causes issues. And, a lot of individuals have pain, a lot of inflammation when they do the bench press. And I think it as a result, a lot of folks stop doing the bench press. They say, hey, I can't do it anymore because it hurts. To me, I think everyone can do a bench press if they do it properly, good shoulder and elbow position. And I have found that the 90-degree position allows them to do it most safely and pain-free in my experience.
Part of the reason for the success of the slingshot is because bench pressing can wreak havoc on some people.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think of this position has been, I think, very well explained recently by a gentleman that goes by the name of knees over toes guy.
Oh, yes.
And that's a hilarious thing to just tack your name to, but I think makes some good points. And I think one of his points is that, athletes that get into extreme ranges of motion and learn to slowly and carefully produce tension in those ranges can actually, to a large extent, insulate themselves from injury risk. And think about something like a sport like Ensima does, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. An athlete like him, he's in positions that are just really not all that fun and extreme ranges of motion, inverting with your legs behind your head, getting your arms sort of broken off this way and that. And if they don't practice in those extreme ranges, there's some very good rationale to say their actual rates of injury in those ranges that they will encounter in sport for sure, whether they like it or not, is going to be higher. So what do you think about the idea that maybe if we prepare athletes gingerly, carefully, methodically to expand the ranges of motion until they can get into really extreme ranges and still produce force, what do you think about the idea that knees over toes guy, for example, is a good proponent of, that we actually reduce the injury risk by getting into those ranges comfortably and slowly?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if you saw this earlier. I was mentioning, we were briefly talking about knees over toes, guys. I was saying that he and I actually agree on a lot more than what we disagree on. So I think the one area that you just called it out is the range of motion component that we probably have differing views on. A few things that I would say that one of the keys to making sure that an individual who maybe goes through more extreme range of motion, like a martial arts sport or jiu-jitsu, or maybe even, dancers or rock climbers, it's another one, wrestlers. One of the keys that I always say is, hey, you just got to practice your sport. Okay, that's one of the best ways to keep that sport specificity, that range of motion for that sport. So I'm not saying, hey, don't even practice your sport like that. But in my opinion, one of the best ways to prepare the body for that sport is actually practicing that sport. And if it requires larger range of motion, then when they're practicing that sport, I think they obviously need to get into it. They need to be prepared for it. One of the things I would also say is that people have been getting into extreme range of motion in their respective sports for decades, centuries actually, or millennia. And it was well before the dawn of the fitness industry ever came about. So it's not like we needed deep end range strength training or deep end range fitness training to get people to be able to perform deeper positions in their sports. People have been able to get into those positions for years. And I would actually argue that the ability of individuals to get into these extreme positions now is worse than it's ever been, even though we've been emphasizing this so much. So I would say that one of the best ways to make sure individuals are ready for extreme positions is make sure the muscles and the tissues are healthy in general. They're not inflamed. The muscles are able to absorb force, so that if they are caught off guard and have to get into a more extreme position, their muscles are healthy. Their tissues are healthy. They're not inflamed. Their body's not sending inhibitory signals because there's so much pain and discomfort. It's like if somebody gets put in like an arm position where, again, I'm not a martial arts expert, but if they get put into a certain position and that shoulder has been, inflamed and tight from just, doing excessive range of motion, maybe like on bench press for some reason. Okay. If they get put in that position, their body's probably going to shut it down even more. They're going to have no strength there. Whereas if the tissues are healthy and they get put in that position, they'll probably have better ability to absorb force. But I also understand what you're saying. It's like, hey, we're not talking about doing so much training in that position where it produces inflammation. So, but again, I would argue that humans have been able to do these extreme positions well before the fitness era or end range training ever came about. The training that I do does not take that ability, that innate, inherent ability away from them. We're just adding to that by giving them a therapeutic stimulus to make sure their muscles are stronger and more resilient.
Do you consider your training therapeutic and not ergogenic then?
I would consider it to be both.
Okay. Interesting. And then, okay, another claim real quick. You're claiming in a few of these videos that 90 degrees is better for muscle growth. Mm-hmm. There's like a pretty decent volume of literature now that directly examines full range of motion versus partial, and the full wins almost every time. Right. There's also a considerable amount of literature on the fact that muscles, when they produce tension while being stretched, actually yield a bigger hypertrophy response than if muscles that produce an even larger amount of external load when are not stretched. Or do you think that that still confers some sort of advantage to 90 degrees? Because to me, it seems like if I were just analyzing, I'd say, oh yeah, a very deep stretch seems to grow more muscle. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say the stretch with tension is in fact in my opinion, it's not just overload, but like you said, stretch with tension is probably the most important factor for stimulating the hypertrophy response. So I'm not opposed to stretch. I'm just opposed to excessive stretch, because what I'm saying is that when you do a proper 90-degree position, the muscles are actually very stretched. Biomechanically, it may look, or visually, it may not look that deep, but the muscle fibers themselves are really lengthened because we're creating so much active tension. And I'll try to adjust the screen here just for a second, but I think, Mark, you mentioned this a little bit on the bench press. If someone is doing a bench press and their shoulders are internally rotated, to get any semblance of stretch in their chest, they're going to have to keep going down and down and down and down. And finally, they may actually start to get some stretch in their pectoral fibers. But if they know how to set their back, open everything up, then, by the time they're 90, in my opinion, if they're actually keeping everything fully engaged, their muscles will be maximally stretched at 90. They won't be able to go deeper unless they lose tension. So again, I'm all for the stretch. It's simply that there's a point, and I think everyone would agree that there is such a thing as too much stretch, because if we just said, hey, stretch until you can't go anymore, we would say, stretch before the muscle rips off the bone. We know that's not optimal. So there has to be some happy medium there. And I believe the balance of that point is at 90.
That's a fair point. I mean, we kind of see this like when we're doing an exercise like a row. Some people will say, hey, pitch those elbows back as far as you could possibly get them. And now we're kind of hearing some other folks saying maybe there's a slightly different way of doing them. Maybe you can just kind of drive the elbows down and kind of do that reverse shrug type movement, and you can help load the lats. Interesting points. I think you guys going back and forth here, and I think this is really helpful. Do you have another question, Mike?
One more.
Go for it.
So a lot of the exercises you're exhibiting are what we would call in sports science unstable training. So essentially, it's intentionally generated to be the exercise is intentionally designed to be unstable. And what we found in unstable training in the research literature is that it fails to produce very high forces. Because of a lack of stability, high force production doesn't occur. So we kind of have this bifurcation in training where if you're going to be unstable, it might as well be in the techniques of your sport. So for example, if Nsima is practicing not getting swept, it's going to be super unstable because it's part of his technique. But when he wants to load his hips and his chest and everything to be stronger for jiu-jitsu, it seems like the specificity principle should dictate that he gets real stable on like a proper bench press. And then with maximum stability can exert maximum amounts of force. So he's training a high force production in the gym, which is kind of what the gym is supposed to be for. And then, like to your earlier point, the athlete does the athlete stuff and goes through all these ranges of motion and all the stability stuff. So when I see the unstable training that you're doing, my first question is kind of like, if they got more stable, wouldn't their muscles get stronger? And then we could take that new strength and put it into the sport. Because so for example, if I see a grappler that I have to go up against and he benches 315 on like a wobbly situation, kind of halfway up and down, look, this is a scary guy. It takes a lot of strength to do that. But if I see a guy sink 400 plus 500 in a stable bench with a lot of power, I'm like, that guy's fucking kill me, and I don't want any part of that. So, isn't it better to maybe get more strength when strength is optimal? Another quick example is like if it was raining on your head, if the sun was shining really bright, you wouldn't be able to lift as hard. So we have gyms with ceilings and air conditioning, so that doesn't happen. So, and then, it'd also be much harder if the music was blaring or you hated the music, or someone was, yelling at you at 3 a.m. and you didn't go to sleep. And then it'd be like, well, it's kind of a different challenge. Well, yeah, that's a different challenge. You end up lifting less, and that challenge is less because it challenges your actual muscles and tendons less to get stronger. So don't we want to be kind of at our best foot forward, real stable and strong with barbells and dumbbells, so that when we get real strong, we can transition to exhibiting that strength in that athletic context of sport? What do you think about that?
Those are great questions. First off, you're analyzing it way deeper and more scientifically than most people do. So I like that. Because oftentimes people just like ask the questions like, dude, are you even thinking about how you're phrasing it? So I like that. I think, so just real quick on that, when you said, if you saw, someone benching 315 unstable, like, some crazy instability variation, maybe hanging band or a ball, and then you saw another guy doing, 500 for a few reps. Like obviously the guy who's doing the 500, that's like, oh man, this guy can probably pack a lot of force. Personally, I would be more scared of the guy who can do both. So my argument would be not to do one or the other, to have the capability to do both. But I would also say that, being able to do 500 and doing that on a more frequent basis is more important than the 315, but periodically incorporating the unstable variation. So one thing that probably goes a little bit more unnoticed.
Are those videos on your Instagram of your guys benching and squatting to depth and deadlifting super heavy loads real stable? Because I think most, if not all of your videos seem to have some kind of instability component.
Yeah. So one of the things I always say, and I need to do a better job of this on Instagram, is 80% of everything I have my athletes do, everything that I do, it focuses on the foundational movements. Okay. Now, I say this a lot, and when I post exercises, I do intentionally oftentimes go after exercises that are a little bit more eye-catching, because I know that for me to reach the most population, the largest portion of the audience, okay, and to make the biggest impact, okay, because that's ultimately what I'm trying to do, is how do I get people to notice things, read a little bit more, and to, basically take a look at what I'm doing. If I just posted deadlift, squat, bench, and even though we do a lot of those, and that makes up a stronger majority of my training than just unstable versions, I'd probably get a quarter of the people looking at my things. My reach, my potential to impact people's lives with what I believe are helpful methods, it would be less. So I do try to tell people that, hey, the unstable versions should never replace the foundational movements. They're added, they're extra. The athlete has to earn the right to be able to do those before we even touch those. I have a lot of athletes come to me the first few months of training. I don't want to say they're disappointed. They're like, dude, when do we get to do the stuff I see you put on Instagram? I'm like, hey man, you got to demonstrate to me that you can do the foundational movements properly first. So that's just kind of my answer there. Now, I would argue too, there are some benefits and with some of the unstable training, like, for example, we just take something like foot and ankle activation, which I think is very underrated and very important. Some of the unstable versions, even if we go as extreme as the BOSU ball, which honestly probably less than 1% of everything I have my athletes do is on the BOSU ball. Okay, but I do periodically use it because I know if they can really learn to activate their feet on there and create a stable platform, even if it's just like one time out of the entire duration that I've worked with this athlete for a few years, if they experience that one time in their mind, even in their nervous system's like, ooh, okay, I see what you're saying. My feet have to activate like crazy in order to stay on there. If they can get that one time, and then we just, hey, that's all it needed, and they can kind of see and get that to transfer into some of their other movements, that's good enough for me. So I do think there is some benefit to stability training, but I do think a lot of coaches overuse it. It's like all this, functional training, functional, instability. It's like, that's all we do. It's like, dude, come on, you got to lift some heavy weights. You got to learn how to pack a punch. Like you said, you got to learn how to produce force. That's the most important thing. All of the biomotor capabilities in physiology are built around the foundation of strength and force production, and there's nothing better than the foundational movement. So I don't disagree with that one bit.
Got it. I totally understand. Yeah, having a big following is important. I have a tiny following and I live alone and I'm addicted to masturbation. So you don't want to go.
Still,
you don't want to go my way. Mike? Hey, Nsima. I see you on the forums. Masturbation addicts.
Hey, I'm not talking about masturbation, homie. It's porn. Masturbation's great, brother. I clarified that. Hey.
Nobody here is yelling at you about it. Stay calm.
I see your forearms, though. I see the forearm games right here.
I don't train my forearms, baby.
I know what you mean, brother.
Yeah, what's with this lighting?
Guys, yeah, isn't it weird? Am I in jail? Am I at a CIA Black Ops facility? And they're like, all right, you can talk for half an hour. Like, guys, I got to get going. I got to run.
We appreciate it.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Am I released?
That was fantastic from both you guys. Most people would be, on both sides, would be kind of unwilling. And I forced this on Joel. So, Joel, you're a savage to be able to take this on without any preparation. Thank you so much for your time today, Mike.
Like I said, Mike, even having talked with you now face to face like this, I have even more respect for you as a professional in the field than I already did, because I saw the way you handled yourself, even just on social media. So it was nice talking with you, and I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Likewise, Joel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This was super awesome and open-minded of you to take on such short notice. Nasima, always a pleasure. Mark, cut that thing off. Jesus Christ, you're going to get arrested.
Look into my eyes. Now, I know that you want to be looking better. You want to be going, walking the streets, being like, damn, I look and feel good. Because then everyone's going to be looking at you. That's why we've partnered with Vuori Clothing. So you can stop wearing your ripped up tank and your long shorts and step your athleisure game up. Vuori has clothes that you can wear to dinner with a date, or you can wear it in the gym. Personally, some of our favorites are the Ponto Performance line, and it has this dream knit fabric, trademarked, that literally feels like baby skin on your skin. It sounds kind of weird, but when you put it on and feel it, my God, that will change your life. Right here, this is the Boulevard shirt jacket. You guys are always wondering what kind of long sleeves we're wearing. It stretches, it feels good. Oh, Andrew, where can they step their game up?
Absolutely. You guys got to head over to vuori.com/power project. That's VUORI.com/power project, and you'll automatically receive 20% off your order. Links to them down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
I mean, there's just no advantage to being weak in an area. And the 90-degree angle is probably the most overused section of strength. Think how we line up for a deadlift. Think how we get into a squat. So the 90-degree area is used a lot. And so most people have a lot of potential to really get new stimulation for the tendons and gradually build up stronger ligaments by working sort of the end ranges.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because we've had people where we've mentioned that and we've talked about that, but people don't understand why is it not just working the muscle? Why is it working the tendons and the ligaments and strengthening those over time? Because many people don't think that you can really strengthen those. They think that after they start to degrade, they're just going to get worse as you get older.
Yeah. So if we think about the Achilles is the biggest tendon in our body. Mm-hmm. And when we get into calf work where the knee is more bent now and the load is now like on the Achilles, well, you now also end up with more load on that soleus muscle, that lower, deeper calf muscle. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's a brilliant study from 2019. Well, I don't know if brilliant's the right word, but it makes it really clear that people weaker at extending that foot have more Achilles tendonitis and stuff. Mm-hmm. So, and not just at extending the foot, but then within weakness extending the foot in like a bent knee rather than a straight-legged position. So like when you now start to load that knee over toe and load the calf, now that weight is like going into the Achilles, meaning there is load on our muscles, tendons, ligaments when we're doing just about anything. Mm. And if you now go into like a much deeper position or something like that, you're now going to put, it's like if someone who had like tendonitis, they would feel the pain in those areas. You know, it's like someone with tendonitis, they reach the knee over toe, they're going to feel pain in that area. Now, if they sit back into like a 90-degree position, not letting the knee over toe, they might be able to keep the pressure more on the muscles. So there does simply have to be like when you go into these more quote unquote extreme sort of ranges, there's then more, your muscle can only go so far. And so there's more pull on the tendons and the ligaments. So it's just sort of a stimulus thing. You still feel the muscle, but you're now stimulating more into the tendons and the ligaments. But then we need to be strong in those areas to be protected. So someone could probably someone who, you know, has really deeply studied muscles, tendons, ligaments, could probably do some fantastic stuff to see, you know, which exercises work which things. But yeah, if you just sit back, you know, on a squat, you are going to be winding up using more muscle than if you just reach your knees forward and like, oh, my knee hurts there, right? Mm-hmm. So scaling those qualities, because in sport and life, we wind up in those positions. So we can build those up, and then the very tendon can develop and grow. And there's been some stuff, they didn't even have a name for it, but there's even like pictures in the study of people doing reverse step-ups, like exactly like we were coaching today. They didn't even have a name for it. It was just like step down off the box this way, you know what I mean? And now there's been like the Peterson step-up and the Pollack step-up and now they, yeah, and well, my name happens to be Patrick. It kind of works out. You got three. But the point is that they found that like the patellar tendon would actually regenerate and grow and strengthen. So it's almost like if you said, like, here's probably a simple way to think about like what would put pressure on your tendons or ligaments. Think about in your body, like what movements would hurt? You know what I mean? Yeah. Because when someone says, "Oh, my knee hurts," they're not talking about their quad muscles hurt. You know what I mean? They're usually talking about their quad tendon, their patellar tendon, or they had, I had my MCL or my ACL or this or that. So yeah, it's almost like you're thinking, what shit hurts your body? And then how do we scale that back to a level that doesn't hurt your body? And then we get stronger at that. I mean, that's really, if you just scratched everything I rambled about for the last 5 minutes and took that statement, that would almost be a simple way of thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like what would hurt your joints? Like what would hurt your shoulder, your elbow, your this, your that? And then how do we scale that down to a level that doesn't hurt and then train it? And that's actually, a lot of physical therapists really understand that concept. So actually quite a few of the people here today who were, were so appreciative of this stuff are physical therapists, because they duplicate this data and they're using it. They're using ATG with like amazing results with their patients because they understand how to apply it. So ATG doesn't work or not work. Everything we do out there can work or could not work depending on how it's applied. And that's probably the simplest way to explain it. It's like we're taking the things that hurt and then finding the level that doesn't.
I think, there's something very simple that people can think about is there's a risk reward factor, with everything, but there's a reason why it's called risk to reward. In life in general, you don't really get the reward without at least some risk. And so while we want to encourage people to move pain-free, we want to encourage people to get better ranges of motion, you're doing so in a fashion as if you were to be putting your mother or your grandmother through a training session. You're not trying to white knuckle these things. You're not trying to. There's actually a bunch of individuals today that were doing the Astagrass split squat. And I went over to them and I just put my hand on their shoulder and I said, relax your neck. And then I said, okay, hold on a second. Just let's have you start the exercise over. Okay. I want you to breathe. I want you to concentrate on just really relaxing. I said, you were wincing through your face a lot. You had some good movement there. It was a great movement pattern. But when you got to a place of discomfort, you went, and it looked like you were taking a poop. And when you clench up the old butthole like that, that's not a great way to demonstrate how mobile you can be. And so,
smart.
I heard Nsima talk about before, which I have not thought about before, but I know about kind of relaxing the face, but relaxing the eyes. I was like, oh, that's a really awesome cue. And so I told the guy, I said, relax your eyes and he went to get in position again and he moved quite a bit further and he was like, wow, that's really and it's just sometimes that encouragement to people, but just having those tools can allow you to take these little extra risks that will give you that little extra reward. The hard part sometimes is like, how iffy do we want this to get? And I do think that Joel SEEDMAN brings up a lot of really interesting points. Mm-hmm. It is really important for people to understand if you don't work on mobility that often or that much or at all, and you go to do an Olympic lifting style squat and you're a person who's tight like myself, you are giving up position. But the question now is giving up position for what? Are you just on a slant board with no weight? Because my God, if that throws you off and that gets you hurt, then you have a lot of current issues that need to be addressed. You're just not a very healthy person.
Life is going to be pretty risky.
Life is going to be risky. Everything's going to be kind of hurting, right? And it's unfortunate for people that can't move in those positions. But you most likely can do a lot of these things with a 20-pound dumbbell, a 40-pound, a 60-pound kettlebell.
Most of what we were doing was body weight today.
Yeah, and we're all doing body weight.
And the sleds even reduce, it's almost like negative body, like that heavy forward sled drive. You can't move without your knee going over your toe, but you kind of get to lean your weight against it. It's slow. Yeah, it's exactly right. And we complimented Joel SEEDMAN's coaching of how much he gets guys to control the weights. Mm-hmm. He's getting guys to control heavy weights. I'm not trying to compete against him or compete against anyone. The movements we did today are just trying to fill that gap in the system of how do we improve at those areas we stink at. And there's a risk involved in doing anything. But when we do that, how much does that reduce our risk going forward for the long term. So I always believe there's a solution.
And as I explained, and I saw you explain the same exact thing today, you want your ability, like your current ability to demonstrate strength or mobility, to be able to move upward, but your performance is not ramming and slamming up against that. You are continually elevating yourself. You're continually elevating your capacity. You have a larger capacity, but for the most part, you don't really ever go to full capacity. There's usually not a lot of great reasons. You're not going to get the training stimulus even that you're looking for. When you think about some of the greatest sprinters and some of the greatest explosive athletes that we've ever seen, and even a lot of power lifters, it's really rare for them to go above their capacity. You want to develop an incredible work capacity, work beneath that, occasionally brush up close to it and say, "Ooh, that was maybe a little too much, but luckily I got the rep, or lucky I was able to do that thing." That is how you improve. And I think that it's hard to be composed. It's hard to kind of stay in your lane and relax and just let that happen that way.
Mm-hmm. That's a great way of putting it with the capacity. And it makes me think of the backward sled, which we've talked to death. But it's like the idea with that is that, sure, people can reduce pain in a session of doing it, but that's not the purpose of it. I've done over 100 miles of it, which now I got to start keeping track again. It's probably getting close to 200 miles. That's capacity of knees over toes. You know what I mean? Yeah. That you're trying to build on these capacities, and then you're going to find all of a sudden things that maybe to someone else looks really difficult is actually quite easy for you, but that's no different than anything else you try to get good at.
Hey, Pat Project family, shut your f***ing mouth. No, not really, but kinda. You should keep your mouth shut when you're asleep. Now, on the podcast, we've been talking about the importance of nasal breathing for years, and we've been talking about using mouth tape during your sleep for years, as it's going to help your sleep quality because you're going to be breathing through your nose. We had James Nestor, author of Why We Sleep. Actually, that was Matthew Walker, but James Nestor, author of Breathe. We had Patch McEwen. We've had so many people talk about the importance of taping your mouth and breathing through your nose when you sleep for your sleep quality, which helps your recovery, which helps every aspect of your health and fitness. So, hostage tape. If you want to get some of this to help you sleep better, and it also stays on your face if you're a bearded man, which is one of the big problems with mouth tape, head to hostagetape.com/powerproject. And there you can actually get the Power Project annual deal, which will give you a year's supply of hostage tape. 55 cents a day for tape, pretty much. And you'll be able to save $150 along with getting 2 tins, a year's supply of tape, and a blindfold. That is going to be something that you want to get your hands on. Links in the description along with the podcast show notes. Shut your mouth.
One of the things that basically caused Jake and I to talk about this to the extent that we have is because if you watch the video, I do hook the one side, and visually I look like I'm fine. But what actually happened in this video, I herniated my C6 and C7 and caused a compression injury to my thoracodorsal and dorsal scapular nerves. Most of the brunt of so you see I twist right there.
Yeah.
It ends up, a lot of the weight is singularly on my left side. That right there caused a lot of damage to the dorsal. Yeah, I punched that right arm out, and the left side gets all of the brunt of the weight for a half a second, but it's long enough to push that shoulder down and do some serious damage to the dorsal scapular nerve. Dorsal scapular nerve plays a big role in scapular control, like shoulder blade control, and the use of your lat muscle and and the long head of your tricep. That same year, my bench, I have the old all-time world record squat in the 220 weight class right now, squatted 837 pounds, but my first all-time world record goal was actually the bench press, because in that same training cycle, I benched 575 pounds. At that time, the 220 record, I think, was 571 or 572, but after that happened, I experienced an extreme drop-off in strength. There was no injury. There was no pain. There was no tangible injury. There wasn't any pain. There wasn't any hurting or numbness or whatnot. I literally just was failing to contract my tricep and my lat. And I went from being able to bench 575 to dropping to being unable to do a push-up without winging of my scapula. and I couldn't lock out anything more than 225 pounds. Couldn't feel my arm whatsoever if I put it overhead. And that's been it. Like we talked about this previously. Like it's like, why are you doing the things in training? I didn't know how to get past that injury. I talked to a couple of different physical therapists, neurologists, and whatnot, and like no one could really provide me with any significant answers. So I would back off. I'd back off, then come back, and like sometimes it would work. Like the first showdown that we competed against one another at, I bench pressed 507 pounds. That was
after this whole
yes,
thing.
yeah. So it's like there'll be like 6 months where it doesn't fucking work, and then 6 months where it's okay, and then 6 months where it doesn't, 6 months where it does, whatever. And but the thing about it was, the longer it went on, the length of the dysfunctional time was getting longer and longer and longer, because this past showdown, I was only able to manage to bench 446 pounds, and there's significant lag in that left tricep, and I was starting to like lose that sensation entirely, and worried about like tricep atrophy and whatnot. But so it's like my viral video. I'm the guy that bent the bar, but that's a really like defining moment in my career. But it's exciting too, because like we talked about, we have the philosophy of training, like, why are you doing the things that we're doing? Now I've been talking to you guys about, I'm implementing a lot of different stuff to actually come back from this injury. And recently I'm actually feeling progress. I can feel contractions again. I hit 300 pounds on a close grip incline, which previously, even as close as 6 months ago, I couldn't do more than 185 on that movement. Mm-hmm. And that's because of this guy, because he has that knowledge base that complements my own, that gave me a path that I didn't even know was there. So that's the one we're on right now. And like the next speed I'm doing, it's to be determined, but I'm very excited for it. So. Yeah.
So Jake, it's wild, because you said you went to neurologists, a bunch of PTs, and nobody could help you solve this. But you came up with some shit that has allowed him to progress. What different thing? How did you help him tackle that differently?
You know, I think it really just comes down to caring. I think a lot of times, and I don't want to put every doctor on a blast, but I think sometimes you come in and, you know, you have this symptom, you have that symptom, whatever, and they like to kind of group people together. And it's like, you know, well, I've seen a lot of people like this, it doesn't really get better, or they kind of have like some set protocols that they go through. Like if you have this, you get that. If you have this, you get that. It's just, you know, A, B. But and I don't think it's really necessarily like a lack of knowledge or a lack of studying with some of the doctors or the people that you visited. I think it's just the lack of caring, being able to sit down and say, okay, what is happening here? There's plenty of information out there, right? Like what can cause a nerve to not function. And if you're resourceful enough, you can go figure that out. It can be A, B, C, D through Z, right? And then you start kind of knocking it off. Okay, it's not that. That's not what happened. It's not this. That's not what happened. Okay, I think it's probably this, right? And then, so we made a game plan, basically just sat down and said, I think this is our best bet, right?
And what was it?
Well, it's a really in-depth. I mean,
it's in progress. So that's like, I don't really want to put the cart before the horse, because like me being the egotistical asshole that I am, because I just said fuck you to God, read into that however you want. But I want to come back. Yeah, I want to come back and not only like break my all-time world record, but I want to annihilate it. Like, because this is the first time I've been hopeful. Like, I mean, you've been through a million different fucking injuries. Like you have those where like this, it's not career ending, but it's career defining. It's like this one is going to be, if not insurmountable, incredibly difficult to work around. That's what I felt since 2018. I was like just getting what I can, like clawing and scratching for these small little things. But now that I've been working with Jake, like I don't really want to like call my shots, but like I told him, if I hit a bench PR on the platform, I'm going to kiss him on the fucking mouth. Like, I don't even care, because like that was so unbelievable to me in previous experience, that like now that I actually feel like I'm making progress, like I'm waking up and I'm excited to go train like my pressing movements, because I'm progressing every single fucking time. And it's like, Jake can go into more detail, but like I don't want to go into the whole thing, but a lot of it is not only like the way that I'm training, focusing more on like the mind muscle connection, or like the neuromuscular side of things. But it's also like brain chemistry, because like I was talking to you guys before we started the podcast, like I started a lot of things at 20 years old. I made the jump from a tested federation to an untested federation. I've been on androgens since that time. I'm also a stupid white kid that likes to have fun, so I've taken a couple of recreational drugs on occasion that are very, very dopamine. They cause a lot of dopamine release in the brain, and I'm also, I can't even remember what the fuck I was going to say, and that's the fucking ADHD. I'm also diagnosed severe ADHD, and I've been prescribed Adderall since I was 20 years old.
But looking into the history is important to kind of help you solve for this problem, right?
Yeah, and dopamine is...
The doctors never fucking asked me that. Right. That was never a thing. They're like, oh, just do some nerve glides. Oh, you're not making progress? Okay, that's fine. Like, then you're fucked, you know?
Right, but looking back on it, if you look at the neurotransmitters in your brain, the biggest one that causes muscle contractions or your motor reflexes is dopamine, right? And we go into his past and we see, oh, you've been really destroying your dopamine receptor, basically, right? It's kind of like if you grab a barbell, that deadlift bar, a newbie comes in, grabs it on a fresh new bar, it hurts, right? Your hand hurts. But over time, you build a callus, and that's the same thing with dopamine. It's like when you start using like a painkiller, like a lot of people have chronic pain, they get on a painkiller, an opiate. First time they take it probably makes them a little high, right? Like, oh, I'm happy, whatever. And all of a sudden it stops working. It's the same thing, right? Like you become sensitive and you build up calluses to whatever you're doing in life in general. And so looking at him, a lot of, recreational drug use, some specific AASs that are working on your dopamine receptor as well.
AASs?
Yeah, steroids.
Steroids. Yeah.
Okay.
Trenbolone. It acts on the dopamine receptors, and it's like if you run tren too long, like that. So basically, again, I'm sorry, cutting you off, but it's like I would always find that adding tren in would help my contraction. I would be able to push harder through the tricep. So I was very reliant on adding tren. I don't know. Can I talk about this on the podcast? Okay, I don't know. I don't fucking know. We have a PED podcast, so I don't know if
you can talk about anything.
That's fine, because I'll put myself. I'm open about anything. I'm whatever. But because if I can help anybody like make better choices and actually think about what they're doing, that's what we're here for. But I would find that trenbolone helped me going into meets because it helped me get more out of the contractions in my tricep. But because it was like, okay, 6 months would be good, 6 months would be bad, it started being like 7 months good, 5 months bad, 8 months good, or 8 months bad, 5 months good, whatever. Like the good was getting less and less. And me not knowing what to do, I would stay on tren. I would keep pushing the tren. And there was a period of time where I was on trenbolone for over a year. And that's completely irresponsible. Like no one should fucking do that. But I was trying to get better. I was chasing my goal. I was clawing and scratching, like I was saying. But the thing is that it acts on the dopamine receptor, and then all it's doing is like oversaturating. So like the high that I was getting, the high that you get, it's not high anymore. You're not getting the benefit. The benefit is like it goes away because it's not novel. You're oversaturated.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really the only difference is I just sat down and we just had a conversation just like friends, right? Sat down, okay, what's your past? Where could this be going? And that kind of knocked out that list. Like we have this list of things that could cause his symptoms. And we start seeing like this trend of, okay, we've had a reliance on drugs, right? We've had a dependency on drugs. We've had a lot of dopamine stimulation. So how can we get that back, right? Like, how do we reverse that? And that's where the plan came together. So then, I put together this plan, and I came to Joe and said, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan, basically a year-long plan. The first 8 to 10 weeks is going to go like this. Once we hit that point, this is what we're hoping for. Like at the end of the first, 8 to 12 weeks, we should be getting this result. And if we're not, we need to change it.
What was like, I know there's it's so deep what are you guys talking about right now, but like what were you looking for him to feel?
So his big thing is the tricep, right? He can't use his tricep. So at the end of the 8 to 12 weeks, we were hoping that we would not have atrophy in the tricep, but actually be able to grow and use the tricep, right? Like we don't see that lag. That's what we're hoping for, is that we're not seeing that lag. And then we also wanted him to be basically a little bit more aerobically in shape. And so we're coming up on that mark, which we set it as 8 to 12 weeks. I think it's been 8. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing, like, we're getting exactly what we wanted, right? And now we're like, okay, cool. Now we kind of get to go into phase 2. So phase 2 actually starts today.
Yeah.
Right, which is kind of cool. We're going to do it here today, which is really fun.
Yeah, I'm actually going to load my spine for the first time since the showdown. So like squatting or deadlifting or whatever he tells me to do. So, but that's the thing. Like, that's why I have no, like, it's so easy to call you my best friend because like we talk every day, and it's the fact that I trust you because it's the care. He obviously cares. Like he obviously gives a fuck, you know? Like he cares about what I'm doing. And because he has, like, I can feel that buy-in from him, it's so easy for me to trust him. And then I'm like, if it's one of those things, because people will ask me like, oh, well, when's the next competition? And it's like, I don't know. I want to do the showdown next year, but I'm not in any rush to, because I want to be where I want to be before I get back on the platform.
How are you going with a torn bicep for 5 weeks? I mean, I feel like that's just still shocking to me, how you're just training with that and it's just there.
Well, I went to mainly squat movements and variations. I was still able to do suitcase carries. I still had grip because the biceps doesn't affect the grip so much. It's more supination, right? So I was able to still hold on the bar, get the lifter's wedge and lock in, but I just made sure that I didn't, the tension I put on the bar came from my lats being locked down, not from my wrists and forearms. They're just a vessel that I touch the bar with. Everything else is locked in with my torso. So I get really creative with the belt squat. I'm a big fan of belt squats. One in particular, Squat Max, where it's directly underneath you. And I loaded the crap out of that belt squat for 5 weeks. I did barbell squats. And then a secondary day, I did my core work really heavy, my belt squats. And I just experimented a little bit in combination of being bigger, smarter training and not training other lifts. I kind of just, you know, Mark, when you have those bad meets where everything kind of it's coming together, then it falls apart. This one was really bad and then came together.
Wow. What was the key component to be able to squat that kind of weight? Because like, even when you unrack that weight, it looked like you were going to be able to handle it. It looked like you stood up very straight with it. What do you think was like a key component that got you from, because you said you didn't even squat 1200 yet, and you went kind of right from mid 11s or high 11s to 13.
Well, I'd gotten a lot stronger in the gym. I just couldn't quite accomplish it on the platform, just to me screwing it up. So it was the big thing is the mental part of it that Stu very, very nicely put about having to you gotta want to run through a brick wall. You want to be at the point where you would just crush someone if they got in your way. So that mental toughness and that mental focus, along with the core of iron, I did it. I didn't skip any of my core work. I did all the little things that I should have done before. And I just knew if I could pick it up out of the rack soundly, that my core was prepared to handle whatever it was that I picked up. The only problem was if I could pick it up and still stay secure with my arm. That was the only thing I was worried about. But I mean, it's the fear. It's the fear of failing. I've seen your lift 100 times, Mark, with 1080 or 1092 or whatever it was. And that's unfortunately when you're at a bone crushing weight like that, or you're pushing absolute physiology, that's sometimes a likely outcome. And you just got to face that. And sometimes things are going to break. So there came a point in that meet, I knew I was only doing the squat. So what the heck, you know, I don't have to worry about if I get hurt or something. I don't have to worry about benching or deadlifting. I'm already going into surgery in 2 days. So, you know, as Arnold says, what the hell?
When you get ready
for it. And I did have one point where I considered not taking the fourth attempt because I already got the all-time world record at 1281. And what I've learned from Stu is not be greedy. Don't be greedy. But I'm like, if I don't, this bar is loaded and I say, hey, I'm good, my friends were never going to let me live it down, and I would regret it forever. And you saw how easy it was. But that's the self-preservation fight that you have internally. You have to override and supersede that limit that your brain has, and you've got to unleash the fuse box, as Stu says. And you know, sometimes it comes out really good, and other times it's a disaster. So I was lucky enough this time to come out unscathed, and you know, it was a good time. It was definitely unexpected from a lot of people, because, you know, Mark, I've been competing since '99, and I don't even think you thought I was still competing.
No, I didn't. I had no idea. I had no idea until you came back and crushed that big weight. Do you think you could have done, like, if they misloaded it, do you think you could have done like 1350? I mean, you
Yes.
blew the weight up.
Yeah, so
Sort of irrelevant what's on the bar, right?
Yeah, I think that I was just locked in and everything was perfect that day. I don't know if I could replicate it as easy because it all came together. But the person that was coaching me, he said that if it wasn't just for the 1300 barrier, we would have put 1335 or something on there because the 1280 was my perfect squat. The 1281, I don't have video of it right now, but that was my best squat that I've probably ever done. The 1306 was a little wobbly on my back, maybe due to the arm, not being able to lock it in, but I still handled it fine. Definitely an interesting experience with that. I didn't expect for it to happen, but I was delusional enough to kind of believe that there's a chance of it happening.
You mentioned Stu said like you got to unleash the fuse box, and if you listen to that Stu McGill episode, he mentioned go to a dark place, etc. You mentioned that the big part of that day for you was the mental side of things. So for you, what has been your mental process to getting yourself ready to hit some of these monstrous weights?
I practice. So I practice sometimes when I'm standing around waiting on clients in my gym. I'll think about going to that dark place. I'll envision myself setting up under the bar, how light it's going to be, how I'll smash it. I go through every possible scenario of what could happen, how I'm going to adjust. Let's say the bar pitches forward instead of correcting it with my back. Stu talked about having the ability to navigate it through your ankles and stay in, the leaning tower, being able to stay upright with it if you need to correct it. But just practicing and being there so many times and failing sometimes and not wanting me to fail again, not wanting myself to come back and say, you know what the worst feeling in the world is? It's the morning after a bad meet and you wake up and you got to catch a plane and then everyone's texting you, asking you, how'd it go? What happened? Why didn't you? So that's why I didn't talk about going to do something big, because I've done that too many times and came up short and have to answer those questions that suck. But I practiced going there mentally. And so once I went under the bar for the 1300, I'd already been there a couple dozen times mentally. And I just, of course it was one of those things where you get under the bar and you second guess everything. Like, oh my gosh, am I going to die? No one's ever tried this much weight, but you just overcome it and just do it. You push the feelings aside that you have sometimes, and you just override it and do it. So my mental focus is ramped up with each lift. So when I was warming up in the gym the week before the meet or 2 weeks before the meet, I treated every single weight the same. I picked it up with the same intensity, settled. So can I say one more thing? I know I'm rambling a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. That same dark side that I have is the biggest reason, that dark side we talk about, getting up for a lift mentally, running through a brick wall, whatever it takes, you're going to do it. Whether you blow apart, you don't give a shit. That's why I have to walk away from the sport, because that destroys me mentally. That same mindset I'll try to replicate in daily life sometimes. And it's hard to turn it on and turn it off. So it's funny that you asked me, how did I practice it? You have to practice going to that dark place, 100% neural drive. The problem is it's not good for you mentally to do over and over. So the mindset that I have the week before a meet, it's pretty dark. I'm pretty short. I'm focused. The morning of a meet, I'm pissy. I'm angry. Everything irritates me. But if I'm happy-go-lucky, I know there's something wrong there.
But we've talked a little bit about it briefly, and I'd love to get your thoughts on you and I learned how to box squat, and Louis taught a lot about like sitting back on the box and not specifically driving the knees forward. And now you're seeing more people talking about driving the knees forward. Some of powerlifting as we knew it changed because they got rid of the gear. People started to squat a little lower, and when you squat a little bit lower, your knees tend to want to pitch forward a bit. We had Ben Patrick on the show. He's a friend of ours. We've talked a lot about like the knees over toes type of stuff. What are some things that you might think are maybe a little bit off about some of that message? And what are just your kind of thoughts in general about, box squatting versus like specifically trying to drive the knees forward?
So the initial box squat wasn't a technical thing from Louis. What it was it separated the eccentric and concentric chain of the movement. So it's like, go bench press. Like if you're listening to this right now, just pause, Go over to the bench press and bench press 135, touch and go, and then 135 with a 2-second pause, and tell me which one's easier or harder. That was the whole point. The point was the box separated the downward phase from the upward phase, which taught you, one, how to stay tight, but two, it also started to change your form a little bit, teaches you about lateral pressure. So when Louis would have you sit on the box, you might loosen up the vertical pressure, but the lateral pressure stays 100%, right? And so it teaches you where to stay tight. With that being said, if you look at not all the squatters, but most of the great all-time greats. So we could talk about Hack and some of these other guys. I think to be an all-time great, they're going to need to be around quite a bit longer. But if we look at, say, Don Reinhold, we look at who was the first guy to squat 1,000? I can't remember what his name was. I haven't talked about him in a while.
There was Dr. Squat.
Well, Dr. Squat, but I think it was before David Waddington.
Oh, yeah.
Dave Waddington. If you look at Dave Waddington, Ed Cohen, Mike Bridges, so I'm trying to cover all these weight classes, and Don Reinhold, you start realizing that they don't squat with their shins coming forward. And that's where Louis initially got that idea for technique. And at least as far as I remember him talking to me about it at training and breakfast. So I started modeling my squat mostly off of Chuck because I knew Chuck was modeling it off of what Louis was telling him from Bridges and Cohen and all them guys. So if you go back and watch those dudes squat, you start seeing their shins are very vertical. And the thought process for it is to utilize more posterior chain to squat. So when people see like I'll give you an example. You see the 520 for 24 and people are like, well, that's not as deep as, say, Tom Platz did his. Well, are you measuring how far his shins go forward or how deep his actual hips are? Because if you look at it that way, it's pretty damn close. Because if your knees go forward in Louis' thought process, and really mine, it's wasted energy. Because as you go forward, you're not going deeper in the hip. So what you start to realize is that forward in some ways can be a waste of energy.
Like a sissy squat. You can keep driving your knees forward and you never come close to breaking parallel.
Exactly. So what's the point of squatting is in competition, you break parallel. Now, whether it's by this much or that much, it's still good or bad. It doesn't matter. So here's the thing. My thought process on the knees going over the toes is that it is an exercise that should be done on occasion. But in my opinion, if we look at where people's muscle imbalances are, most of the time they're anteriorly strong or at least dominant and they're posteriorly weak. When I let my knee go over my toe, I'm basically focusing on all quad. And if it's all quad, it's a lot of lower back. Well, if I sit back and push my knees out, now my hamstrings, my glutes, my lower back, and my quads all work together in one synchronous unit. That should be mastered first before you go knees over toes. The reason that most people, when they squat vertical shank, they think it looks higher than letting the shins travel forward is because it's the most efficient way to break parallel. If I sit back and push out, then it looks almost like it's high, but it's not because there's no wasted energy. If you ever watch Chuck Vogelpohl squat, it's like fucking magic.
Yeah, when you squat, one of the objectives to, especially in powerlifting, because you mentioned you're just trying to get your hip lower than your knee, one of the objectives is to not move your knees any lower. And sometimes that's the first thing that people do. They're moving the object that they're supposed to dip down below parallel down by jamming the knees forward with the first part of that movement. So you really want to sit back so that knee stays nice and high.
In reality, how far you sit back is how far you push out. So if I push my knees out as hard as I can, my body sits back automatically because it doesn't want to go forward. But the big thing is what's the number one thing that most coaches back in the day and doctors told you was bad? Squatting. Your knees. It's going to kill your knees. Well, not if you squat with all the pressure everywhere. The problem is when you let the knee travel way too far over the toe, it puts too much shear force at one particular area, therefore causing an issue. And then people will go like, well, why would you do that? And I was like, well, Olympic lifting is different because they need to catch the bar. So this is Chuck probably squatting somewhere around 1150 at 242.
And this is a wide ass squat.
And that's super wide, but look at his shins.
Jesus Christ.
That's just, his shins stay totally straight. Now, the thing of it is, if you were to watch, say, like a Tom Platz with his knees go way over his toes, it's not any deeper at the hip. It's just wasted motion forward. So it's difficult because everybody has their opinion on it. But like I said, here's the thing. I think it's interesting. And like I said, I think there's a lot of things that Patrick and a lot of those guys have to offer that I think some people need to listen to. But in reality, here's my thing. And maybe I'm biased because I've trained hard for a lot of years. But if it was so good at developing anything, why does Ben Patrick have no leg size?
Actually, in person,
he's got pretty good legs.
He has pretty solid legs.
See, every time I've seen him, on video.
Well, he's a kind of a thin shaped
Yeah.
guy, but his legs are pretty jacked.
So here's my thing is my legs got to be 31 and a half inches around with multiple leg fractures, and I was bedridden for fucking 2 years. That to me shows I didn't have a knee problem. My joint didn't hurt. I was fucking broke.
Yeah.
And I got my legs to grow that big. So I'm starting to wonder, like, if my knee was to go way over my toe, how did I get all that quadricep development from not doing that? So my thought process is, why not use a squat particular technique that develops everything, not just one area? So I think there are some things that he talks about. And like I said, I'm not a guru of his information, but I know he does talk a lot about glute ham raises.
Yeah, he does talk a lot about hamstrings and balancing it out. Yeah.
But here's my thing. It's transfer. So here's my deal. You put me in heeled shoes, ultra narrow, and you watch how much I can fucking squat.
They'll still squat a lot.
Yeah, I just did 600 for 10 like fucking probably 6 months ago. And then put me back in my position and see what I can squat. My point is that to me, teaching those positions only makes you good. Again, we go back to the beginning, only makes you good in one way. If I were to take Ben Patrick and show him how to squat my way, he wouldn't be any good at it. I go his way, I could still squat a shitload.
I think you'd be kind of surprised though.
Maybe.
Because there's two things.
He covers a lot of ground with his training. So, the Instagram posts are only what we can see, but he does cover a lot of ground in his training.
Yeah. His oddly enough, when it comes to the knees over toes stuff, right? I don't think you'd argue that it's not beneficial to be able to develop some comfort within that position. It shouldn't be maybe the whole way you squat, the primary way you squat, especially if you're a powerlifter. If you're a powerlifter, you'd probably want to develop a way of squatting that would allow you to move the most weight possible. And squatting in that fashion probably is not going to, the way that Ben does, probably is not going to allow you to do that. But a powerlifter who does squat in that fashion, developing some of that, like let's say an outside training block when they're not working the specific squats, it's probably a decent idea. But the other thing, I think, like, Mark mentioned, he does work like GHRs and hamstrings and that type of stuff a lot. When he came in here, it's not a crazy amount of weight, especially when thinking of a powerlifter, but he came in, he deadlifted.
465.
Deadlift, I think it was 475.
Yeah.
And it was super, he's never done that before, by the way. It's not like he deadlifts, but he easily deadlifted 475.
Trap bar deadlift.
And it was pretty glute and hamstring dominant. So I get what you're saying. If someone goes too far down that rabbit hole and only just hammers that, it's the same. I think it's a similar thing to the powerlifter who just stays low bar squatting their whole training cycle year after year after year.
My point is like, if you put me in Patrick's position within reason, I'll excel at it.
Oh yeah.
Put me in the other position, I'll break a world record. I think it's being able to have transition. But what I see on the internet, and like I said, I don't study it a ton, is that it's the same positioning he's showing over and over. That's what I see. And that's where I have an issue. I say, if you squat like this, say once every 6 or 8 weeks, I'm down. I think it's a great idea. But utilizing the exact same position all the time or saying that alleviates certain issues, it, to me, is a little off. Like, I think that, really squatting is going to be dependent on a few things. It's going to be dependent on how you're built. It's going to be dependent on where your muscle weaknesses are and how much you're attacking your weaknesses. And then, like I said, you need to last a long time before you start doing advice. Meaning, I would not be standing here talking to you about squats and my positioning on it unless I lasted through fucking 4 world records and I don't have any knee problems and I'm 43.
Yeah.
That's when you start going, well, see, and that's when I start sitting back going, okay, well, last another 10 years and then tell me you have the same thought process. Because my thought process has come from many, many years of grinding at the highest level that I could possibly obtain. And I try to tell people, I'm like, look, it's all about, again, you can have a great idea, but that idea changes over time as you evolve. So how I think about things now isn't all the same as what it was 10 years ago, but a lot of it solidifies where I've been and what I've done and who I have fixed. So seeing guys like, like my 350 firemen that I train and watching them get stronger and then watch their injury rates go down. But I don't see anybody making that famous. And that's guys between 20 years old and 60.
Yeah.
And they have no injuries and we're saving them $500,000 per department. Like that's where I would think the average person would go, I want to fucking listen to this dude. But it's just not the case because it's not sexy or new or whatever. And this is the other big thing. If you look at how Ben Patrick talks about squats, it's very similar to 20 years ago what Charles Pollack was saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Charles
He references Pollack a lot.
He does. But I'll tell you this. I was Pollack the last 5-6 years he was alive. And after he went and did seminars with me and Eddie, he changed his mind.
Oh, in what way?
Vertical shank.
So what did he say about it? Was he talking about like this is the way people like? What did he mention about it?
So what he started to say was, I'll give you the prime day. We were in close to his hometown. I was doing a seminar in Colorado Springs after we went to Amsterdam and Prague and shot seminars. And me and Eddie were showing. Pollack was showing his Olympic style squat, and me and Eddie were showing ours. Mm-hmm. We get to Colorado Springs to do the last seminar, and I'm squatting, and Eddie's fucking around with squatting because he's already older at that time. And I do something like 600 for 10 vertical shank, just a belt. Charles gets smashed with 275 with his knees over his toes. And he's like, man, I can't figure it out. I was like, dude, you're not using any hamstrings to squat. You're not using a fucking bit of your posterior chain. So me and Eddie showed him how to do some vertical shank squatting. He went back home, and about 4 or 5 months later, he called me and he goes, I went back to squatting the way that I used to squat. He goes, my squat just went up 75 fucking pounds.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I completely changed my thought process on it.
And that was partially though because he started working the posterior chain, squatting vertical shin, right?
Right.
But this is where I think maybe there might be I don't know, misunderstanding of maybe what some of Ben is doing, because visually you see the knee over toe, knee over toe, knee over toe.
Right.
But in between those posts and when you go into like what he actually does within his programming, there's a lot of posterior chain. Like there's a lot of hamstring, there's a lot of glute, there's Nordics, there's a bunch of things that really dive into that posterior chain where it, let's say that thing that might be a weak link of continuing to hammer that knee over toe is equalized, counterbalanced by working that posterior
he's all
chain.
about like hip flexor and shin and all those
and with
kinds
all
of
that stuff I agree. Like I said, the transferability is put him in 6 different squats and see how he responds.
Yeah.
If he's not very good at 3 or 4 of them, then my opinion is don't train that way.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you can put somebody that trains in multiple fashions and ways, like I said, I don't think knees over toes is a bad idea occasionally. Mm-hmm. Just like I think box squats are good occasionally, but we've all seen it. Guys that only box squat have a problem. They go to a meet, they bomb fucking out because they're not comfortable getting in the hole, but it doesn't mean the box squat's bad. It meant that it was overused for that particular person at that particular time. And that's where it becomes, what do you need at that time? And where I have a problem is I've never seen an athlete that had weak quads. I've seen athletes have weak fucking hamstrings. So although he has everything right with the accessories, why squat in a dominant way that makes those muscle groups even more dominant? That's my problem with it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like you may not even need knees over toes if you know how to squat in the fashion that you're talking about.
Utilize every type of squat position that you can to develop a full range of motion, to develop strength in all different capacities.
I've never had any knee injuries in any of my lifting. My right knee has like a little bit of like tendonitis, and that developed years ago, like forever ago when I was in high school playing basketball. And it just was something that would always come back. But I didn't really necessarily have to do anything to fix some of that. But when Ben came around and started talking about the backward sled drag and all that kind of stuff, I was like, you know what, I think I can still make my knee a little stronger. So I practiced a lot of what you're saying is like go upstream and downstream of the injury. Ben was talking about the shins and all that stuff. So not only do I stretch the shins a bit, but I also dig into them with some myofascial release. I train them. I train some of the muscles around the knee, and I have zero pain in the knee at the moment. So,
Hey, I know you guys enjoyed the video, so like, comment, subscribe, and head to the Power Project Discord below. Talk to y'all later.
But it's not fun being weak and, playing kickball and being out of breath or whatever. And I see it, especially in the junior high kids, and I give them a ton of credit because it is one of the most difficult things, because there's kids, and I'm not lying, you guys, I couldn't believe this until I started, who cannot physically do a bodyweight squat. And it is like, how do you guys shit? Like, is there like a pulley system? And so if you can get, it's better late than never. But man, does it make a difference. And something the discipline with our kids, and this starts with the head football coach. It doesn't really start with me because he sets the tone. And I think that's super important to point out is we take 1 week off a year. It's usually after the last game, we take a week off. Now there's, vacation time, but very few kids take it, unless they go somewhere with their parents, but we just lift right on through. And because we do that, we're so consistent. We don't have to kill the kids ever. We run year round. So it's ironically, we don't run during the season. We found that to be, you practice, we're a small team. You're running around for 2 hours, you're fine. But our running is so easy because we do it every 3 days a week. So even if we need to, condition up, we just add a little bit more, take a little bit out of lifting, but we're still getting stronger. So I think if they could take that, and I always tell the kids, because our school is a public school, and there's occasionally you see some people running around the track when we're doing sprints or something. And I tell them, listen, at the very least, just do 10 hundreds 3 or 4 days a week. Just don't sprint them, just run them hard. Because at our age, you can't sprint. It's even if you run your fastest, it's no longer a sprint. And you'd be surprised at what just maintaining some basic physical capabilities in your body does. And again, this is nothing new to probably anyone listening to this, but if you can get that in, if you're a coach or a parent, it doesn't have to be miserable. So anyway,
what people that hear that right now, if you're an adult or you're a late teenager and you didn't get going when you were younger, please don't let that discourage you. No, I agree with, but the thing is, I totally agree with you, because when I think about it, like, as an adult, when you're trying to start playing an instrument, right? It's fucking hard. But when you see some 6-year-old on a piano, they hear some shit, they're like, deep, 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 and like 2 years later, they're a fucking aficionado. You're like, pick up shit as a kid so quick that, like, parents, if you have kids, get them doing some physical shit, because you will, like, you're totally right. You will save them for the rest of their life.
Yeah. And it goes far beyond the physical health. It is unbelievable. Like, it's like being like a heroin addict when you're young. You're always, even if you're clean, you're still an addict. And so it's tough to see, but the funny thing is, like, I started doing a Murph every single day. And I've done it for 45 days now.
Damn. Whoa.
And when I started, I just did a quarter of a Murph twice a day. And the point being is, like, I knew I wasn't capable of doing it. I didn't want to feel like shit. I hate, and when you have a family and you got a business and you got job, you got all this shit going on. I no longer can afford doing a set of 20 rep squats till I'm dead, and then doing another hour of assistance work and then pushing the probably, because I'm useless as a human. And Mark, you know exactly what I'm talking. You guys know, like, and that's fine when you're 20 or 15, but it's not. So to make a long story short, I just, over the course of 2 months prior to doing what I'm doing now, I slowly just knocked away at it until I felt I was completely, like, normal and easy. And then I would just add a little bit here and there, just 1 or 2. And now it's like, it's just nice brain numbing work. And I feel fucking fantastic. I've lost 30 pounds and, I feel great. So, but the point being is, I didn't start that on day one, so if you haven't really done anything, just do, some push-ups and body weight squats every single day. And it doesn't have to just, if 20 is your limit, that's what it's going to be. Get 20 to be easy. So, and it's unbelievable. When I first started doing it every day, I was like, oh boy. And I was like, wow, that was it. All right. Fucking A. And, don't get discouraged, but don't put yourself in a position to be discouraged. Like, if you don't squat like Dan Green, it's okay. Like, no one cares. And one of the things I remember Jordan Peterson said is, don't compare yourself with others compared to how you were yesterday. And it's just, and I tell the kids too, all we're doing is chopping it down a huge oak tree. Every day we just swing the axe once. We just make a little dent. We make a little dent. And I say this is a 4-year process. So we don't have to go fucking nuts right now. We don't need to. And then it always happens. The young kids come up like, I think I can do more. I'm like, I know you can do more, but we don't need you to do more. And then the seniors come in, just fucking listen. Jeez, we don't need to hear you bitching and complaining. So, but you know, it's like I said, it's hard for kids to get. I mean, Mark, if you probably maxed out 60 times a week, you know, like, well, I feel good.
Yeah, right.
Shoulders hanging off.
Yeah, going by how you feel. Yeah, it never works.
Good as the lifts are, they just require the big lifts. They just require a lot of you, and that's when. And I was a staunch hater of the goblet squat or the dumbbell squat, and then after I think 2 months of our varsity doing it, once I got hold of them, everyone's hip mobility got better, and ironically, their biceps and their traps got huge. Because if you're doing dumbbell squats with 100, 150 pounds for sets of 10, 20, it was like an unintended consequence. And I'll never forget towards the end of that off season, my wife came and visited. She's like, I just want to see what you guys do. And she's laughing. She's like, every lifter here looks like you. You have big thighs, big ass, and traps. So, I mean, not now. I don't look like that now, but it's just, it was funny because I'm making them in my own image, you know? So, but yeah, it's, I don't know, that's been the biggest thing. The biggest turnaround for me was, besides the building muscle thing is just the implement of that exercise. And we do it 3 days a week. And again, we can get a lot of leg volume. We get a lot of, good training volume without killing our backs and all that other stuff. So, plus, the other thing is, if you tell a kid to squat the 150 dumbbell, they're all pumped up. If you put a 45, 5, and a 2.5 on the bar, they're like, this is stupid. What am I doing this for? So it's a little mental game. I always call it people ask me, do you guys give your kid choices? And I'm like, yeah, chin-ups or push-ups or dips. You give them the illusion of choice.
So now that we improved your squat, how about having stand efforting and help you out with building muscle and nutrition? This is some of the best tips that we've gotten from stand efforting in this video right here. You guys will enjoy it. If you want to get a bigger and stronger, it's going to be a really good one. So click it. Give it a little love tap right now.